this lesson, we are going to look at why and how biologists classify organisms. Believe it or not, we have identified more than 1 million different kinds of organisms living on Earth. And we are adding to that number all the time. So even, as long as we've been around and as much as we have explored, we are still finding new organisms that are out there that we have never seen or identified before. So it's important that scientists are able to classify, to identify those organisms so that they can study and know about them. So organizing living things into groups is what biologists have done. And they put those in those groups based on their similarities. And the process where scientists take these organisms and put them into groups based on how they are similar is what we call classification. So classification is the process of grouping things based on their similarities. This is something that you're familiar with. If you go to the grocery store and you're looking to get a gallon of milk, you walk in the grocery store and you know exactly where you need to go. You go to the dairy section, and then the milk is all in one area altogether. Just like if you wanted to get a very specific type of cereal, you would know that you would go to the dry food section, and then in that section you would go to where all the cereals are, and then they're sort of put together by the brand or the type of cereal. So we are very familiar with grouping things based on how they are similar just to make our lives easier. A grocery store is one really good example of that. And the study of how those organisms are classified is what we call taxonomy. And it is useful because once an organism is classified, scientists know a lot of information about that particular organism. If you look at the bottom of this page, you see this collection. These are all collection of bees and wasps. And that's just a very small section of all of the organisms that would be in the grouping of bees and wasps. But you see that they have some similarities. They kind of have yellow, black stripes, but yet they're all very, very different. So these are all completely different species of organism, but they do have some similarities. So if we find a new organism and it has many of these same characteristics, then we can know something about it already, or we can make some assumptions about that species. There's a very specific way that we name organisms when we find them. And the person who came up with this naming system is Carolus Linnaeus, the person who devised the system of naming organisms that we still use today. And it's a two-part naming system that we call binomial nomenclature. Binomial nomenclature. Binomial means two names. And that name comes from the genus and the species of the organism. So the first word in the organism's scientific name is its genus name. And the genus is just the classification grouping that contains similar, closely related organisms. So if you look at these three images here of the different cats, and we look at their scientific names, this one is Felis marmorata, this is Felis domesticus, and this one is Puma concolor. If the first name in the scientific name is the genus name, we see that two of these are in the same genus because they share the same genus name. Both of the ones at the bottom are in the genus Felis. The one at the top is in a different genus, so it would be slightly different. It would not be as closely related as the two at the bottom. The second word in the scientific name often is kind of distinctive features of the organism in the name. It's descriptive. It tells you something about the organism. And that second name is the species name. And that is a species is a group of similar organisms that mate with each other and they can produce offspring. So looking at these three examples, we would know that the Felis domesticus is in the genus Felis. Domesticus is going to be that species name that tells us something about it. So domesticus meaning of the house. So it's a house cat. So it describes the type of cat that would be. Felis marmorata is called a marbled cat, and marmorata means marbled. So if you look at its fur, its sort of marbled coat is where it gets its name. So the first name, the scientific name, is going to be the genus name. That's the genus that it belongs to. The species name then will oftentimes describe the species in a little bit more detailed. So when we use binomial nomenclature, there's a very specific way that you write the scientific name in binomial nomenclature. So first of all, the complete scientific name is written in italics. So the scientific name will be italicized. Only the first letter of the first word is capitalized. So both genus and species will be in italics. The genus name will be capitalized, but the species name will be in lowercase. Also, you'll notice that most scientific names are written in Latin. Latin is sort of the language of scientists, and it's the language that scientists used during this time of naming organisms and still use today when they sort of communicate with each other in their scientific journals. They refer to these scientific names because common names can get a little bit confusing. So if you're using the common name for the same organism, it can get kind of confusing. For example, what we call a robin is not what people in Australia call a robin. So our common name robin is a very specific type of organism. Completely different species of bird in Australia they call a robin. And then in England, they have a totally different species, a third different species of bird that they call a robin. So if I were to do scientific research and I would publish an article and I would talk about the migratory habits of the robin, and then someone in Australia picked that up, those were not findings that they would find based on their robin. So if I use the scientific name, it becomes much more clear which exact species of bird that I'm talking about. Also, common names can be a little bit misleading in the name. So this critter up here in the right-hand corner is what we might call a groundhog. Some people call it a woodchuck. In other places, they call it a marmot. And again, in other places, they call it a whistlepig. So common names might be misleading if you're doing science work because people won't know which species you're talking about. It can also be a little bit misleading as well because when you talk about a groundhog, is the groundhog a type of hog or pig? No, it would be more closely related to some type of rodent and not to pigs and hogs. So common names can be a little bit misleading. Alrighty, so I would like for you to go back and do the in-text questions, pages 15 through 17, and we will continue talking about classification in the next lesson. I'll see you then. Thanks for listening.